Justin has been doing an admirable job of hosting the conference so far, but he deserves a drink. And he has a drink in hand now, and because he's a bit worried about slurring his words for the rest of the afternoon as he starts to get more and more pissed, I've been brought in as the super sub to host the afternoon session. I'm going to tell bad jokes, just like Justin does. And on that note, I'd actually like to introduce our first speaker, who also tells bad jokes. And yesterday introduced himself as a mini-me of me, which I thought was the most lovely thing anybody's ever said to me. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you David Phillips, who is going to be telling us about playground equipment. My mini-me. Give you a hand to David, please.
So for those who don't know me, my name is David Phillips. For those who do know me, my name is David Phillips. My name is not conditional on if you know me or not. So that's the high point of this presentation. I'm also here to reassure the men that it is okay to wear pajamas to work. So I'm president of a fantastic company called NLogic. We work with broadcasters. We're involved in Cinch, which is awesome. Agencies and advertisers to help make broadcasting better through technology, data, and consulting, which is why I'm here to talk to you today about slides and seesaws. Now, you're going to notice a really awkward segue. Slides and seesaws are things that you can buy. Let's call it shopping. And if we look at the world of shopping, you notice that? Thanks. It's going through a period of what can only be described as radical change. A huge amount of disruption. I was told when rehearsing this with my wife last night that high street isn't a phrase that Canadians understand. Haven't been here 14 years. Do you understand what a high street is? Okay, it's like a low street, but it's higher up. So slow death of the high street, bricks and mortar is basically on its way out. So it seems that when we're thinking of the world of retail, every day there's a new disruptor that comes up. Companies like Warby Parker, Casper, Indochino, Bonlook, which is from Quebec, and of course everyone's friend Amazon. These companies are disrupting and killing the high street by being online only. So it seems we're dealing with a situation that's a bit like a slide. And what I mean by that is that there are two main characteristics of a slide, is that the movement is one way. You typically don't go left off a slide, and it's inevitable. When you start at the top, you go to the other side. So it's a one-way, inevitable direction. And it seems that in retail, that's what we're dealing with. It's an inevitable movement from bricks and mortar, from the left to the right, to online. And that, in fact, companies should be judged on their ability to move quickly from one to the other. And if we look at the world of data and metrics, there are similar trends that appear to be as inevitable. So there's a move from measuring context. So, for example, a program in which viewers may be or audiences may be, towards measuring people and concentrating on that. There's a move from opportunity. So there was an awareness of an ad towards action. Here's something that happened as a result of someone seeing that ad. And there's a move from looking at what happened in the past to what happened in the future, towards prediction. And similarly, these trends have the same sort of assumptions that come with the seemingly inevitable move from retail from bricks and mortar to online. There's an assumption that our job is to move from one to the other, that we should replace the things on the left with the things on the right. The things on the right, the assumption is, are inherently better, and so therefore it's inevitable that we will move from one to the other. And yet, if you look a bit more deeply at some of these more recent online disruptors, you'll see a slightly more cloudy and slightly more nuanced picture. So Warby Parker, which I'm sure most of you will know, launched in 2010, online only, now has 67 physical stores and plans to open, I think it's 100 by the end of this year. The reason is because they found it worked better. As the founder said, a website in the middle of the internet doesn't exist to someone if they don't know it's there. Indochino is another company that launched in 2007. Again, online only with no intention of being anything other than that. Now it has 34 physical stores open with plans to open 150 in US and Canada in the next year. So it's a much more balanced picture. And again, the reason why Indochino is doing that is because it works. In a market where we have a showroom, our online sales grow twice as fast as in a market where we don't. They're also cheaper to acquire and spend more. So it works better. And in fact, all of those companies I talked about before have either opened or are in the process of opening physical bricks and mortar retail stores. They may call them showrooms, not shops. Doesn't really matter. It's a physical presence. It's a much more nuanced picture than we were possibly led to believe. It's more like a seesaw, in fact. It's less an inevitable trend from one to the other, and more a case of trying to find a balance, to find a point on the spectrum that works best for your company. As Neil Blumenthal said, we think the presentation by retail experts of either online or offline is a false choice. It really is the intersection of the two. So I think the same is true of data. We're not dealing with a world of slides where our job is to move inexorably our companies from one to the other. Our job is to find the right points on the spectrum in these areas that best match our business objectives. So that could mean investing more in action if you're in broadcast. It should mean investing more in prediction and in people. What it shouldn't mean is running away from the things that served us well and continue to serve us well. And I think the way we need to think about this is not so much a horizontal orientation, but a vertical orientation. What can we do to improve both sides of this equation? Because the risk is that if we think our jobs is moving just from one to the other, we'll either neglect or disparage the things on the left. And that will be a bit like shutting or ignoring your retail bricks and mortar stores because you launched a website. Doesn't make sense. What can we do to improve our understanding of context, our understanding of opportunity and what happened in the past, as well as looking to improve our understanding of people, action, and prediction? The eagle-eyed among you will notice there's both a slide and a seesaw in here, because the title is Slides and Seesaws, just to remember what the title was. So I think it's good to remember one thing here, that when we think about the future, we typically make a mistake in thinking that one thing replaces another thing. We make that mistake in all sorts of contexts. And rather than talking about something being the future, we should talk about something being a future of something. And when it comes to data, I think our approach should not be to think, we should move things inexorably from the left to the right, but rather, what's our purpose? What's the insight we're trying to derive? And what's the best point on the spectrum for our business? Because this is a case not of a slide, but more of a seesaw. And our job as companies and as an industry is to find the right point, the right balance. Thank you very much.
David, wait. I'm hoping we're going to have some questions from the audience because, I mean, I have to say that Nancy from Google's slides earlier were absolutely brilliant, very slick, but David's animation there with the arrow moving from side to side. I mean, you know, there's a thing that we do in London which is like,
yes,
wow. The mic drop of slides.
I was going to do the Testarossa.
So a rather philosophical message about achieving the right balance. Do you think that the right balance is, or do you think we have the right balance in Canada at the moment?
No, I don't.
And do you want to actually call out clearly where the balance is then? Because it feels like you're dancing around the issue here.
I don't think we're at the right balance, and I think there isn't a balance. I think it's specific, and a lot of this is specific to what you're trying to do. I do think that as entities tend to have a panicky race towards what's ever new. I love that quote that Grant quoted from Bob Hoffman about, you know, our propensity to go for new things. And I do think we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that like, well, if this thing is good, that old thing must be bad.
Yeah.
And I know I go on about the same thing all the time, but like it very, very rarely is a case of either or. It's almost always a case of both and. And I think that what we tend to do is devalue what's old because it's old. Speaking as someone who's getting older. And we tend to race and panic towards the things that are new. And actually what tends to happen is the smartest companies go back to the middle before the old companies get to the end. So rather than making all the effort of get to the end that may not be the right point, let's pause and let's take a moment to think, actually, are we doing this because it's trendy? Or are we doing this because it's actually providing what we need as a company and what we need as an industry? So it's great to, and that does mean moving, but it doesn't mean a headlong race towards the end of the spectrum.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, we've got a question there. Can you just wait for the microphone and then introduce yourself as well as...
Hi, I'm Xavier from Agent X Solutions. How do you know when something's trendy unless you're looking in reverse?
Let's tackle the question a slightly different way, which is, I think we need to allow for the fact that anything new, there's going to be over-exuberance around. So if our default setting tends to be if something's new, and especially if something's promoted by the duopoly, we are very over-exuberant about it, and we go about it with an assumption that it's right and it must be the thing to do. And I think what I would suggest is that our default setting is not so much that must be something that's awesome, is skepticism. I wonder if that's something that's awesome, and would that be suitable for us? And I think sometimes we tend to go the opposite way. We tend to go, if everyone's saying we need to go audience, 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 okay, we must go audience, 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 and we sort of run over this side of the room, and then meantime, Google's actually gone back in the middle of context and audience. So I think if we have a default setting of, actually, is that right for us? And if so, what do we use to get it? As opposed to, well, we're going to have to do that because that's what they're doing now. I think that's maybe a way of trying to tackle what you're talking about.
Great. Well, Justin's making signs at me, which means he either wants me to move on to the next speaker or he's wanting another beer from the back.
Has been drinking, yeah, maybe that.
So that just leaves me to thank David for an excellent presentation. Thank you, David.